In this video, we reveal the true side of the Middle Ages, a period that spanned nearly 1,000 years. Between the shadows of empire, the true story of Boethius, the last philosopher of Rome, or was it something else, something darker in meaning, not in light? The last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, is quietly deposed. There are no grand battles, no flames licking the marble walls of Rome. As the church rose and barbarian kings claimed thrones once occupied by emperors, the written word, especially reason, became dangerous. Boethius was accused of treason. The charge was false, but the sentence was real. It was not a cry of despair, nor a lament for a lost empire. It was a dialogue between Boethius and a personified lady philosophy. She asks him, "Are you truly imprisoned? Or has your soul chosen its own chains?" Just silence, heavy, final. It felt as though history itself held its breath. But as was the century that followed the fall of the Roman Empire truly a dark age, as many claim? For centuries, the consolation of philosophy was second only to the Bible in its influence. The year is for 76 AD, the Western Roman Empire collapses. In the northern parts of Italy, a man named Onicius Manlius Severinus Boethius still believed in the power of thought. He was the fire they tried to smother and failed. A philosopher, scholar, and statesman, Boethius had studied the ancient Greeks, Plato, Aristotle, and translated their ideas into Latin. While empires fell around him, he clung to the belief that knowledge could survive the storm. And yet, not everything had vanished, but Boethius was no idealist. He knew that power did not welcome free thought. Thrown into a dark prison in Pavia, stripped of titles, possessions, and his future, Boethius was left with nothing but his thoughts and his silence. And from that silence, something profound was born. In that cell, he wrote what would become one of the most influential works of medieval Europe, The Consolation of Philosophy. He wrote as a man stripped of everything, yet still possessing the one thing that tyrants could not touch, the mind. He responds, "How can I hope for justice in a world where no one remembers who is guilty and who is innocent?" He wrote of fate, time, justice, and the illusion of power. Boethius was executed in 524 AD, no grand tomb, no legacy carved in stone. Words survived. His manuscript spread through monasteries, whispered from scribe to monk, from monk to king. So were the so-called Dark Ages truly dark? Or was it not the absence of light, but the decision to hide it? Boethius was not a flicker in the shadows, but history, like rivers that vanish beneath the earth only to rise again miles later, has a strange way of remembering those it was told to forget. Monasteries guarded manuscripts like relics of a forgotten world, and within them, Boethius lived on, a quiet ghost whispering through the parchment, questioning every truth declared eternal. Centuries passed. Empires rose in the name of God, knowledge, and conquest, often all at once. Yet the question lingered, untouched at the core of it all. If thought survived, why did no one listen? The answer was not silence, it was control. And so a story was told that after Rome fell, the world fell with it. That the light of knowledge dimmed for centuries until the Renaissance struck a match again. Those who held the pen, the church, the crown, the chronicler, decided not just what was written, but what was erased. But that story was a carefully crafted illusion? In truth, knowledge had not died, it had been hidden. Science did not sleep. It whispered in cloisters. Philosophy did not vanish. It traveled under different names, in Arabic, in Greek, in fragmented Latin, waiting for ears that dared to hear it. And Boethius, he became something more than a man. He became a warning, a question, a test. What happens when the guardians of truth become the architects of silence? Now, in our modern age, flooded with information, yet starved for wisdom, his voice calls once more, faint but unwavering. He does not ask us to mourn what was lost, but to question what we believe has always been. For perhaps the darkest age is not the one without light, but the one where we are told the light never existed. And maybe, just maybe, the real darkness is not behind us, but in the shadows of every unchecked truth we're still too afraid to touch.
The flames that burned memory, the Library of Alexandria, no one knows exactly when it burned, or who lit the fire, or even how much was lost before the flame swallowed it whole. But everyone agrees on one thing: something was lost forever. The Library of Alexandria was not just a building filled with books, it was a bold human dream to gather all the world's knowledge in one place. Scrolls from India, maps from Persia, mathematics from Egypt, and poetry from Greece. Entering its halls was like opening a window into the entire cosmos. But what makes light go out? Fear, always fear. Some say Julius Caesar burned it accidentally when he besieged Alexandria and set fire to the harbor. Others claim Christian zealots saw it as a threat to the faith and torched it to erase pagan knowledge. Still others blame the early Muslim conquest, alleging the books were deemed unnecessary and ordered destroyed. But were these just rumors, lies? Or was the truth simpler and far more brutal? Perhaps the library didn't burn just once, but many times, each time power changed hands. Each time a ruler feared what it held, ideas that might challenge his rule, or questions that lacked his answers. Each time religion demanded certainty, and the library whispered complexity. The fire wasn't only in the wood and papyrus, it was in intention. Imagine hundreds of thousands of scrolls, their titles unknown, their contents unread, burned before a single soul could glimpse them. Imagine philosophies lost, sciences centuries ahead of their time, star charts that mapped constellations we only recently named, all consumed by the sacred flame of fear. But what if not everything was lost? What if some knowledge escaped, carried to Baghdad, to Cordoba, to Toledo, to be translated, reborn in secret? Perhaps the Library of Alexandria didn't die, it hid. And today, we are left to ask the same question once more: who gets to decide what should be known? And what must be forgotten? In the end, it isn't fire that destroys knowledge. It is those who decide that some truths are far too dangerous to be spoken. Excellent. Now, we step into one of the strangest and most unsettling theories ever whispered through the halls of Forbidden's history. A theory that questions not just what happened, but when, the time that never was, the phantom time hypothesis. What if I told you that we are living in a lie, not of words, but of time itself? That entire centuries, perhaps as many as 300 years, never actually happened. This is not the plot of a science fiction novel. It is a real theory, proposed by historians and researchers brave or mad enough to challenge the foundation of our historical timeline. It began with a question that no one dared ask: why is there a void? A vast silence in the record of progress between the years 614 and 911 AD. A stretch of time in which very little seems to evolve, no major architectural advancements, no clear scientific leaps, and very few written documents that can be reliably verified. It was German historian Heribert Illig who, in the 1990s, gave this void a name: the phantom time hypothesis. He proposed that somewhere along the line, perhaps under the rule of the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, perhaps in cooperation with Pope Sylvester II and Byzantine rulers, history was forged. That these rulers wanted to place themselves neatly in the year 1000 AD to fit prophetic symbolism, to give themselves legitimacy, to rewrite their place in the grand story of humanity. So they added time, not events, but years. If this were true, then we are not living in the year 2025, we are living in 1728, and we have been deceived, not by tyrants or invaders, but by calendars carved in stone, and beliefs we never thought to question. They demand proof, carbon dating, archaeological layers, astronomical records. Skeptics laugh, of course, and indeed, there are anomalies. Buildings dated to the same century show wildly different levels of craftsmanship. Certain eclipses recorded in medieval texts don't seem to match modern astronomical reconstructions. Even the Julian to Gregorian calendar shift, meant to correct 10 days of drift, mysteriously required only 10 days, when centuries of inaccuracy should have demanded more. But maybe the real question isn't whether time was added. It's why we believe our timeline is unshakable to begin with. What if time, as we know it, is not a stream, but a story? What if the chapters were rearranged, rewritten, or worse, invented? The phantom time hypothesis does not ask us to believe blindly. It demands that we stop believing blindly. And in doing so, it becomes less about history and more about consciousness. About how easily we accept the shape of time because it comforts us. Because it feels solid. Because to question it would be to question everything. So ask yourself, are you standing in the present? Or are you living in a carefully edited illusion, where the past was sculpted by hands that feared the truth would come too soon? The architects of memory, how the church shaped what we remember in every civilization. There are those who build monuments ... and those who build narratives. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, when Europe staggered into what we now call the Dark Ages, a vacuum opened, not just of power, but of meaning. Who would speak for the people? Who would explain the past, justify the present, and define the future? It was the church that stepped forward, robed not only in faith, but in authority. They did not just preserve knowledge, they curated it. Monasteries became sanctuaries of learning. Monks, hunched over flickering candlelight, copied manuscripts word by word, but what they copied was chosen. What they didn't was forgotten. Books of logic and science were kept, but often stripped of context, repackaged through the lens of theology. Works of ancient philosophy were preserved, but only those that could be reconciled with doctrine. Anything deemed heretical, pagan, or politically dangerous vanished, burned, or lost. The church didn't erase history with fire alone, it reshaped it with ink. Entire centuries were recorded only through the writings of saints and bishops. Battles were described in moral terms, the righteous versus the wicked. Plagues became punishment. Comets became omens. Knowledge became belief. And belief became law. And what is more powerful than law? Memory. When you control the story of the past, you control how people interpret their present. You shape their fears. You decide what is sacred, what is shameful, what must be questioned, and what must never be touched. Education, too, came under the church's wing. Children learned not to think freely, but to memorize. Not to ask, but to obey. The curriculum was scripture. The teacher was a priest, and the classroom ... was the future of obedience. Centuries passed, reformers would rise, heretics would burn. Some books would slip through the cracks, preserved in the East, rediscovered later during the Renaissance. But by then, the foundation was set. History had become a cathedral, towering, unchallenged, and echoing with a single voice. But one question remains, ringing through the silence. What truths were never passed down, simply because they served no doctrine? What revolutions of thought died on the tips of trembling pens, in cold monasteries where no one was allowed to think beyond the page? And perhaps most haunting of all, what if the true Dark Age was not a time without knowledge? The return of the suppressed, when lost knowledge spoke again, but a time when knowledge was selectively allowed to survive. Truth has a strange nature. You can silence it, bury it, even erase its name from every page. But somehow, somewhere, it finds its way back. And so it was, centuries after the fall of Rome, after the fires that consumed libraries and the edits of history as scribes, that knowledge began to stir again. But it did not return from within Europe, it came from the East. In the golden cities of Baghdad, Cairo, Samarkand, and Cordoba, under the banners of a new empire, the words of ancient minds were being rediscovered. Not to be destroyed, but to be understood. Greek manuscripts, long forgotten or deliberately abandoned in the West, found refuge in the libraries of the Islamic world. Aristotle, Plato, Galen, Euclid, their ideas translated into Arabic by scholars whose names were seldom remembered in Western textbooks. Men like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and Averroes. They didn't merely copy, they questioned, they debated, expanded, challenged. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, astronomy was charted with precision the Romans never imagined. Algebra, born in the mind of Al-Khwarizmi, gave shape to mathematics anew. Medicine moved beyond the bleeding of saints towards systematic diagnosis and empirical thought. This was not a renaissance, it was a continuation of a thread Western history pretended had snapped. Meanwhile, in the shadows of European monasteries, young scribes began encountering fragments. Translations made their way back across the Mediterranean, through Sicily, through Spain, through merchants and exiles and travelers. And when the so-called Renaissance bloomed in Florence and Paris and Prague, Europe looked into a mirror, only to find a face it had long forgotten. Leonardo da Vinci's sketched machines Plato never dreamed of. Copernicus, armed with Arabic star charts, turned the heavens upside down. Galileo whispered truths that Boethius would have cherished and was punished the same. But the core question remained, had the knowledge ever truly disappeared? Or had it simply gone where no one thought to look? In every page uncovered, every text retranslated, there was a sense of something deeper, that the ideas we claimed to rediscover had always been waiting, not dead, but dormant. Not erased, but exiled. It was never the world that forgot. It was us, taught to remember only what served the story. And so truth did not return with thunder, but with the sound of turning pages. In quiet libraries, in candlelit studies, in questioning minds. It returned, not as a roar, but a whisper. I was never gone. You were simply not allowed to see me. Truth has always walked a narrow road. Sometimes it is written in golden ink, praised in temples, and taught in schools. But more often, it hides, beneath dust, beneath silence. Beneath the noise of a world that no longer wishes to listen. We began in the ruins of empire, among the broken stones of Rome. We wandered through the prisons of forgotten philosophers, the ashes of burned libraries, and the stolen hours of phantom centuries. We saw how kings rewrote time, how priests chose which memories deserved to survive, how knowledge was caged in robes, rituals, and quiet fears. And then we arrived here, in an age of light, so bright it blinds us, where truth is everywhere, and nowhere, where information is endless, but wisdom is rare. Yet still, something burns. It is not in the pages of history. It is not in the institutions that claim to guard it. It is within us, a spark, a pull. A hunger to ask, what lies beneath what I've been told? For every truth that was buried, someone lived to whisper it again. For every century stolen, there were those who remembered time differently. For every silence imposed, a mind kept thinking, waiting for someone to listen. So now, as you return from this long and quiet journey through forgotten years and forbidden knowledge, you are left with only one question: will you accept the story? Or seek the truth beneath it, because the fire that once lit the halls of Alexandria, that once flickered in the soul of Boethius, that once escaped through broken manuscripts and whispered translations, it still burns in every mind that dares to ask, in every voice that chooses to remember, in every silence that refuses to last. There are truths so dangerous, so inconvenient, that no empire, no church, no system dares to speak them aloud. Not because they are false, but because they are unprofitable. You see, a history is not made of facts. It is made of decisions, what to preserve, what to erase, what to exaggerate, and most chilling of all, what to never write down at all. The greatest secrets are not locked in vaults or hidden in coded manuscripts. They are the questions that were never allowed to be asked, the discoveries that were never named, the events that happened but left no witness behind. But perhaps, just perhaps, we are the witnesses now. You, who read this, you, who wonder why things feel off, why the pieces of the past don't quite fit, why the truth keeps changing and always seems to serve someone else. You are not paranoid, you are awakening. And that, more than anything, is what history fears. Not rebellion, not dissent, but memory, honest, untamed, dangerous memory. Because when people remember who they truly are, when they learn what was taken, when they see how far the story was twisted to keep them compliant, distracted, afraid, they stop being passengers in time and become its authors. So no, this journey was never really about Boethius or libraries or calendars. It was about you, about what you do with the spark that has now been passed to you. Will you let it fade, another flicker swallowed by the algorithm, or will you guard it, feed it, and let it burn a new path through the veil of forgetfulness? Because somewhere out there, in the ruins of stolen centuries, in the echoes of silenced voices, the unwritten waits, not to be discovered, but to be remembered, and perhaps it has just begun.
And so, our journey ends, or perhaps it truly begins here. A journey not just through the pages of history, but through the buried layers of awareness, where truths are not erased, but forgotten. Where the fire is not extinguished, but hidden beneath the rubble of time. Together, we walk through the ages. We listened to the whispers of those never heard, and read the lines between the lines. Now, the choice no longer belongs to history, it belongs to you. If something in this story stirred a question within you, if you felt that some truths are still waiting to be told, not as they were written, but as they truly were, then don't let the flame fade here. Subscribe to the channel. Let us continue what we've begun, because the greatest stories never truly end. They're simply waiting for someone who dares to listen.